Victoria Whitman believed that marrying millionaire Richard Sterling gave her the right to humiliate everyone. For 3 years, in their 5,000-square-foot mansion in Beverly Hills, she had terrorized every housekeeper, every gardener, every person who worked for her with cruel insults and constant threats. No one dared rebel against the most feared housewife in Los Angeles. Until she arrived, Maria Rodriguez, 28 years old, a simple maid with a business degree and a dignity that nothing could break. The day Victoria screamed at Maria in front of all the other staff, accusing her of stealing a ring, she didn't know that this seemingly fragile girl was hiding a devastating secret. A secret that, revealed with icy calm in front of everyone, would instantly collapse the empire of arrogance Victoria had built. Because sometimes it takes just one brave person to prove that real power doesn't come from money, but from truth. The Sterling mansion stood like an imperial palace in the most exclusive area of Beverly Hills, surrounded by 3 acres where ancient Greek statues guarded perfectly manicured walkways. 5,000 square feet of imported marble, original frescoes, and antique furniture worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. But behind this beauty hid a reign of terror ruled by one person, Victoria Whitman Sterling. At 32, Victoria had achieved her life's mission, marrying a very rich man. Richard Sterling, a 50-year-old owner of a luxury hotel chain, had married her 3 years earlier after meeting her at a fashion show where she was modeling. Beautiful, blonde, with a statuesque figure and ruthless ambition, Victoria had known how to win him over by promising to be the perfect companion for his high society events. But once she got the ring on her finger and access to her husband's bank accounts, Victoria revealed her true nature. She became the cruelest housewife Los Angeles had ever known. Every day was a survival test for those who worked in the mansion. Her first victim had been Mrs. Patterson, the 60-year-old housekeeper who had worked for the Sterling family for 20 years. Victoria had fired her after publicly accusing her of being too slow, too old, too inadequate for such an important house. She had made her cry in front of all the staff before throwing her out without notice or severance. Then it was Giuseppe's turn. The gardener who had created that green paradise with his hands over 15 years of work. Victoria had humiliated him because a leaf had fallen on the pool surface, screaming that he was incompetent and that she would find someone younger and more skilled. Giuseppe left with his head down, taking 20 years of experience that no one could ever replace. The household staff changed every few weeks. Victoria always invented new accusations. Lunch was too salty, cleaning wasn't perfect, something was out of place. But it wasn't really the mistakes that bothered her. It was the sadistic pleasure of seeing people who depended on work tremble before her authority. Mornings always started the same way. Victoria descended the marble stairs of the mansion like a Roman empress, dressed in designer clothes that cost more than a maid's monthly salary. She sat at the breakfast table already set to perfection and began her daily inspection, looking for any excuse to unleash her fury. The maids, always at least 3 or 4 to run such a large house, moved in silence, trying to be invisible. They knew that a misplaced glass, a stain on a napkin, or even just a wrong look could unleash hell. Victoria had developed a perfect system of psychological control. She didn't just scream. She threatened to ruin the reputation of anyone who crossed her, to let all the rich people in Los Angeles know that person was unreliable. In a city where word of mouth counts more than any resume, it was professional death sentence. Richard, meanwhile, was always traveling on business. When he was home, Victoria played the part of the perfect wife, sweet, caring, always smiling. He had no idea of the reign of terror his wife had established, or perhaps he preferred not to know, as long as he came home to find everything perfect and in order. The staff had learned to recognize the signs. When Victoria had that particular light in her eyes, when she smiled in a too sweet way, When she drummed her manicured nails on the table, it meant she was about to choose the victim of the day. And in 3 years, no one had ever dared to rebel until Maria arrived. That Monday morning in October, Victoria was having breakfast when Elena, the cook, presented the new maid. She was a 28-year-old girl, brunette, with dark eyes that didn't lower when they met her gaze. She wore the navy and white uniform Victoria required of all staff, but there was something in her bearing that immediately irritated her. Maria Rodriguez introduced herself with a calm, firm voice. She came from a modest family in East LA, had a business degree, but had chosen to work as a maid to support herself while studying for an evening MBA. She didn't seem intimidated by the mansion's opulence or Victoria's icy attitude. It was precisely this that immediately annoyed the lady of the house. All the other maids showed themselves humble, submissive, almost grateful for the opportunity to work in such an important house. Maria instead looked her in the eyes with a dignity Victoria had never seen in an employee. That same day began the power struggle that would forever change the balance of power in the Sterling mansion. Maria Rodriguez walked through the halls of the Sterling mansion, observing every detail with the attentive eye of someone used to noticing things. Unlike the other maids who had preceded her, she didn't seem intimidated by the wealth surrounding her. She had seen enough of the world to know that money doesn't automatically make a person better or more deserving of respect. Her life hadn't been easy. Raised in East LA with a mother who worked as a seamstress and a father who died when she was 16, Maria had learned early the value of work and dignity. She had graduated with a business degree with honors, but the economic crisis had forced her to take any job to support herself and help her mother. Now she was studying for an MBA in evening classes, paying for her studies with housekeeping work. But Maria had a secret no one in the mansion suspected. During her previous job as a secretary in a law firm, she had learned many things about power mechanisms and the weak points of those who believe they're untouchable. She knew how to move in privileged environments without losing her identity. The first clash with Victoria came on the 3rd day. Maria was cleaning the main living room when the lady of the house entered with that theatrical stride she used to intimidate staff. She stopped in front of an antique console and ran her finger over the surface, pretending to look for dust. Victoria began her usual repertoire. The cleaning wasn't thorough enough. The sofa cushions weren't positioned perfectly. There was an imperfection in how Maria had folded the napkins. But instead of lowering her head and apologizing like all the others did, Maria listened silently and then calmly replied that she would fix everything immediately. There was no submission in her voice, no fear, just professionalism. This threw Victoria off, who was used to seeing maids tremble before her reproaches. In the following days, Victoria intensified her attacks. She had Maria inspect every corner of the house, called her constantly for useless tasks, criticized her for insignificant details. But Maria always reacted the same way. She listened, nodded, and fixed what needed fixing without ever losing her calm. The other maids, Sophia, a 20-year-old girl from Arizona, and Carmen, a 40-year-old woman from Mexico, watched this passive resistance in amazement. No one before Maria had ever managed not to give in under Victoria's psychological pressure. One evening, while the 3 maids were having dinner in the small downstairs dining room, Sophia asked Maria how she managed to endure Victoria's constant attacks. Maria smiled for the first time since arriving. She explained that she had learned an important lesson. People who need to humiliate others to feel powerful are actually the weakest of all. Victoria could scream all she wanted, but she couldn't touch what Maria had inside, her dignity and awareness of her own worth. Carmen, who had been working in the mansion for 6 months and had already been reduced to tears several times, confessed she was thinking of quitting. She could no longer stand the atmosphere of terror Victoria had created. It was then that Maria revealed something that changed everything. During her training in business, She had done an internship at the very law firm that handled the Sterling family's affairs. She knew details about Richard and Victoria's life that no one in the mansion imagined. And most importantly, she knew something about Victoria that the woman believed was buried forever. She said nothing more that evening, but her two colleagues understood that Maria wasn't just any maid. There was something in her tranquility, in her resistance to attacks, that suggested she knew things others didn't. Victoria, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly frustrated. For the first time since marrying Richard, she found herself facing someone who wouldn't bend to her will. Maria continued to do her job perfectly, never gave reasons to be fired, but most importantly, never showed that submission Victoria considered her natural right. The situation was about to explode. Victoria began planning something more drastic to get rid of that too proud maid. She didn't know she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Fate was about to present her with the bill for 3 years of cruelty and arrogance. And Maria Rodriguez would be the instrument of this justice. The storm exploded one November morning. Victoria woke with a precise plan. She would get rid of Maria Rodriguez once and for all. That morning, she took one of her less expensive rings and hid it in the study desk drawer. Then she called all the staff to the main living room for a routine check. Maria, Sophia, Carmen, James the gardener, and Elena the cook lined up. Victoria observed them with that predatory look they had learned to fear. She wore a burgundy suit and had pulled her blonde hair into a perfect chignon. She looked like a judge ready to pronounce sentence. With a cutting voice, she announced that a valuable ring was missing. A family heirloom that Richard had given her. Someone must have taken it from her room. The silence was heavy as lead. The maids looked at each other with anguish, knowing that a theft accusation meant the end of any possibility of finding work. Victoria let the tension build, then headed toward Maria. She accused her of violating her trust. Maria was the newest arrival and the only one who had access to the master bedroom. It was obvious who the culprit was. The words were calibrated to hurt and humiliate. She accused Maria not only of theft, but of betraying a family that had welcomed her with generosity. But what happened next, no one expected. Maria listened without blinking. When Victoria finished, she didn't apologize or cry. With icy calm, she began to speak. The accusation was serious and deserved a serious response. But before talking about the alleged theft, she wanted to share some information about working conditions at the Sterling mansion.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Victoria tried to interrupt her, but Maria continued imperturbably. During her stay, she had observed many things, and perhaps it was time to clarify matters. The atmosphere changed completely. For the first time in 3 years, someone was openly challenging Victoria's authority. And from how Maria spoke, she had something heavy to reveal. The reign of terror was about to end. Maria began speaking with a businesswoman's precision. She told how she had observed Victoria's behavior, documenting every abuse and humiliation. But what she said next froze the lady of the house's blood. During her work at the law firm Kellerman and Associates, Maria had access to the Sterling family files. She knew Victoria wasn't the successful model she pretended to be. She had been fired for stealing jewelry during a fashion show. The theft was never reported to avoid scandal, but the documents ended up at the law firm. Richard knew nothing about his wife's past. Victoria had lied about her life, inventing a brilliant career. But the documents told a different story. Lost jobs, unpaid debts, and that theft that put her on a blacklist. Victoria tried to interrupt, but her voice came out strangled. Maria, imperturbable, revealed she had found the stolen ring in the study drawer that morning. She pulled it from her pocket and placed it on the table. She had found it while cleaning. Obviously, Victoria had hidden it to accuse someone on staff. Victoria exploded in screams, but her words sounded empty. Elena confessed that other maids had been accused of thefts never proven. Carmen told of threats received. James admitted to being blackmailed. The castle of terror collapsed. Maria pulled out a folder with photocopies of legal documents, proof of everything she had told. Victoria looked at those papers like venomous snakes. If Richard discovered the truth, the marriage would end, and with it, all her power. For the first time in 3 years, Victoria Whitman Sterling was completely powerless. The air in the Sterling mansion's living room had become suffocating. Victoria, the woman who had reigned like an absolute tyrant over that small domestic world for 3 years, now trembled visibly as she looked at the documents Maria held. Her face, always perfectly made up and composed, showed signs of real fear for the first time. Maria observed the lady of the house with the same professional calm a doctor uses to examine a patient. There was no malice in her gaze, no desire for revenge, only the firm determination of someone who had decided to end an injustice that had lasted too long. Victoria attempted one last, desperate counterattack. With a voice choked by emotion, she accused Maria of blackmail and extortion. She said she would report her to the police for privacy violation and attempted extortion. But her threats no longer had their former power. Everyone in the room could see she was a woman in panic. Maria responded with a simple but devastating question. If Victoria had nothing to hide, why was she afraid for her husband to discover the truth? If she was really innocent of everything that had been said, the documents shouldn't worry her. The silence that followed was the most eloquent confession Victoria could make. She couldn't respond because she had no arguments to defend herself. Everything Maria had revealed was true, and she knew it. Sophia, encouraged by Maria's courage, found the strength to speak about the time Victoria had made her cry for 3 hours, accusing her of breaking a vase that Victoria herself had knocked over. Carmen told of days she hadn't eaten because Victoria had forbidden her to touch any food in the house after an alleged cleaning error. James confessed that his daughter needed expensive medical care, and fear of losing his job had forced him to endure daily humiliations. Elena, with tears in her eyes, admitted that in 40 years of work as a cook, she had never suffered such cruel treatment. Every testimony was a brick falling from the edifice of power Victoria had built. The woman who had believed herself untouchable discovered she was hated by every single person who worked in her house. But the final blow was yet to come. While Victoria desperately tried to regain some control over the situation, they heard the sound of a car in the gravel driveway. It was Richard returning early from a business trip. The panic in Victoria's eyes became absolute. Maria, seeing the lady's reaction, understood this was the decisive moment. With a calm but firm voice, she said it was time to decide how to proceed. She offered Victoria 2 options. First, Maria would speak with Richard, showing him the documents and telling him everything that had happened over the past 3 years. Second, Victoria could immediately change her behavior, apologize to all staff, and begin treating the people who worked in her house with respect. Victoria looked at her with incredulity. A maid was giving her an ultimatum? But looking into Maria's eyes, and then at the other staff members who stared at her with determination she had never seen before, she understood she had no choice. The sound of Richard's footsteps approaching the living room door made the decision urgent. Victoria, with a barely audible voice, whispered she would choose the second option. Maria nodded and quickly explained to the others what they should do. When Richard entered the living room, he found his wife and all the staff gathered for what Victoria, with a trembling voice, described as a meeting to improve household organization. Richard, who had never paid much attention to domestic management, simply greeted everyone cordially and complimented his wife on the initiative. He didn't notice the tremor in Victoria's voice or the meaningful looks exchanged among staff members. When the master of the house retreated to his study, Maria approached Victoria and spoke quietly. She told her this was her last chance. If she resumed her previous behaviors, Maria wouldn't hesitate to reveal everything to Richard. Victoria, completely defeated, nodded silently. For the first time in her adult life, she found herself facing someone she couldn't control or intimidate. A simple maid had taught her a lesson she would never forget. Real power doesn't come from the fear you can instill, but from the respect you earn. Victoria Whitman. Sterling's reign of terror was over forever. The months following that November morning transformed the Sterling mansion into a completely different place. The atmosphere of terror that had characterized the house for 3 years was replaced by a climate of mutual respect that no one had ever experienced before. Victoria, under Maria's watchful eye, was forced to completely revise her approach with staff. At first, she tried to return to her old methods, but one look from Maria was enough to remind her what hung over her head like a sword of Damocles. The documents Maria kept were the guarantee that change would be permanent. The first sign of the new course was when Victoria, with obvious difficulty, apologized to Sophia for humiliating her in the past. The girl from Arizona couldn't believe her ears. The same woman who had made her cry for hours was now apologizing with a trembling voice. It was a historic moment in the Sterling mansion. Carmen also received her apologies, along with the promise that she would never again be threatened or intimidated. James saw his professional value recognized when Victoria, always under Maria's discreet supervision, gave him a raise and guaranteed him a permanent contract. Elena, the cook, who had endured months of unjust criticism about her dishes, finally saw her 40 years of experience acknowledged. Victoria began complimenting her menus and stopped inventing excuses to complain. But the most important change concerned Maria herself. Without saying so explicitly, she had become the real mistress of the house, not through fear or intimidation, as Victoria had done, but through the respect and natural authority that came from her integrity. Richard began to notice the improvement in the domestic atmosphere, though he didn't fully understand the reasons. The house functioned better than before. Staff seemed more motivated, and his wife had lost that constant nervousness that had characterized her lately. He attributed it all to the organizational meeting Victoria had mentioned. One evening, during a dinner with some of Richard's business partners, Victoria did something no one expected. Instead of treating staff like invisible furniture, as she always had, she stood up to publicly thank Elena for the evening's excellent menu. It was a gesture that left everyone speechless, including her husband. Maria observed these changes with professional satisfaction. She hadn't acted for personal revenge, but to restore a balance of justice that had been overturned too long. Seeing Sophia smile while working, Carmen no longer afraid to enter rooms, James whistling while pruning roses, was the greatest reward she could desire. Over time, Victoria began to understand that sincere respect from staff was much more gratifying than the fear she had always tried to instill. She discovered that Elena really had extraordinary talent in the kitchen when she wasn't terrorized by constant criticism. She realized James was an artist in his work when he could express his creativity without fear of being humiliated. Her relationship with Richard improved too. Without the constant stress of maintaining her reign of terror, Victoria became more relaxed and natural. Her husband began to see again the woman he had fallen in love with, though he didn't know this change was due to an extraordinary maid's intervention. Maria, meanwhile, continued her evening studies and was graduating in business with brilliant results. Richard, noticing her competence in practical house management, proposed she also handle the administration of his properties. It was recognition of Maria's professional value that went well beyond her role as a maid. 1 year after that November morning, Maria received a proposal no one expected. Richard, impressed by her organizational skills and integrity, offered her a position in the administrative management of his hotel chain. It was the opportunity Maria had always dreamed of, using her business training in a stimulating professional context. The day Maria announced her resignation from the mansion to accept the new position, something incredible happened. Victoria, The woman who 3 years earlier couldn't stand a maid looking her in the eye stood up from the breakfast table and hugged her. With sincere voice, she thanked Maria for teaching her a lesson she would never forget. That real power isn't obtained by humiliating others, but by earning their respect. Maria had saved not only the mansion staff, but also Victoria from herself. That day, as Maria packed her things to start her new life, she looked around the living room where months before she had confronted Victoria with that calm determination that had changed everything. She felt neither pride nor resentment, only the satisfaction of having proved that sometimes it takes just one brave person to restore justice. The Sterling Mansion continued to be one of Beverly Hills' most beautiful houses, but now it was also a house where respect reigned, where every person was treated with dignity, where true luxury wasn't made just of marble and gold, but of human relationships based on justice. And all this thanks to a simple maid who had the courage to tell the truth at the right moment. Like, if you believe dignity is worth more than any wealth, comment which moment in the story struck you most. Share to inspire those who believe truth always wins over arrogance. Subscribe for more stories of justice and courage. Sometimes it takes just one brave person to change everything. Sometimes those who seem weakest hide the greatest strength. And sometimes truth is the most powerful weapon against injustice. Because real power doesn't come from humiliating others, but from earning their respect.